Compressors, limiters. People toss these words around like they're exactly the same thing. They are not. This is the difference between a smooth cruise and pulling your e-brake. In the next few minutes, I'm going to show you exactly when to grab a compressor and when to reach for a limiter, and how to keep the punch without wrecking your mix. So stick around. We're going to do quick ABs, easy visuals, and yes, we're going to take a look at a brand new limiter that I'm totally digging for modern mixes. So let's dive right into the video. All right, first core concept, you got to understand the difference between a limiter and a compressor. A limiter does not negotiate overs, okay? It turns down anything that crosses that threshold, and it will turn it down. It will not let anything through. All right, and it's instant on the attack, which is a really interesting part of a limiter, and we'll get more into that, the differences between the limiter, compressor, where to use them, etc., as we go through this video. A compressor negotiates overs. It slowly takes things down, right? But it negotiates. It lets some things through, right? 1.5 to 1, 2 to 1, 3 to 1, 4 to 1. That means 1.5 dB, 1 comes through. 2 dB, 1 comes through. 3 dB, 1 comes through, okay? A limiter, nothing comes through. No dB comes through. All right, we got to understand that concept. And to show you this and to really help you understand this, I'm going to take this vocal, okay? And I'm going to set a threshold on this limiter, the L4 Ultra Maximizer, brand new one from Waves, by the way. Incredible limiter. Negative 9.12, and the ceiling is going to be negative 6.73, okay? If it hits this ceiling, it's getting turned down by negative 6.73 dB. So watch the attenuation meter here as we play this. It's on the vocal.
I get nervous when I'm with you, baby, begging, what's the purpose? Can't you let me go? Yeah.
Great, awesome to see the visual, right? But let's bounce this in place through the L4 Ultra Maximizer, and then we'll do the same thing with the R comp at a 2.5 to 1. All right, so check this out. We're gonna bounce this in place through the L4. So we'll just call this limited. And boom, you could see right away what happened. First of all, you're going to see that the L4 Ultra Maximizer has a threshold of negative 9.12, but the ceiling is set at negative 6.73. So there is a ceiling, a brick wall ceiling happening here, and you can actually see it. And you can see how it's turning it down. Anything that crosses that amount of gain, it's going to turn it down to hit that negative 6.73, okay? There's nothing coming through. And you can almost see it's turning into a sausage a little bit, right? Yeah. See, all the peaks are getting turned down. They're not getting clipped, which is an interesting thing. I'll show you that L4 Ultra Maximizer can clip it, but it's getting turned down, right? So literally you could go up to the region gain here and you could turn this back up in gain, right? So you could take this clip and go gain, and you can bring it back up, but you're not going to have anything that goes over any peaks, right? So it's going to be limited. It's brick walled. All right. So when we think about this, we have to think about the ceiling and the threshold. The threshold, the more you bring it down, the more it's going to bring all the low level information up, all the peaks, everything. Everything's coming up to hit that ceiling. All right. That ceiling is set and nothing's going to cross that negative 6.73. To really hone this in, to really, really help you understand this, let's take it down to negative 8 dB. Okay. And it doesn't matter about the attenuation, the compression, whatever that's going on here. This is limiting. This is brick wall limiting. So now we're going to bounce it through this again. Okay. Bounce region in place. We're going to say limited harder. Okay, limited brick walled. Now look at that. As you can see, we're getting more low level information coming up, but we're still brick walling. It's getting smaller and smaller because the level, it will not go past that dB range. All right. So you're going to lose those peaks. You're going to lose transients. You're going to lose all sorts of stuff. And that's where a compressor comes in. We want the transients. We want the movement. We want that stuff happening, right? We want that pumping, that pulse of the music, etc. So that's where we use a compressor. Now let's really compress this vocal. And no matter what, we're at 2.5 to 1. Okay. Every 2.5 dB, only 1 is going to come out, but every 2.5 dB, that's not very many. Right? So we're not brick walling it. We're letting things through. And we also have some other functions like the attack is not instant, but let's make it as fast as possible so that it matches the limiter idea. Okay. And now we're going to take the threshold down and listen.
I get nervous when I'm with you, baby, begging, what's the purpose? Can't you let me go?
Okay. So that's going down negative 12 dB on the peaks. So let's take this up to 12 dB. So we can make up the gain perfectly, okay? And now let's bounce through this. Bounce region in place, compressed, hard, real hard, 2.5 to 1. All right, so now you can see, check this out. We still have the dynamics in here. We don't have a brick wall. We're not turning down everything. You can see that it's negotiating the peaks. You see that peak? Came right through, right? Even though we were really, really fast on the attack, it's not instant like a limiter is. See that limiter? Boom, right on that first peak is just capturing it. It's just taking it down. It's like, nah, bro, you're trying to pass the brick wall. You cannot get through this brick wall. Okay, it's a bouncer versus a conductor. A conductor that's going, hey, it's fine. Yeah, let that pass and give us some dynamics and let some peaks come through, etc. Right? So this is the compressed signal. No matter how hard we compress it, we're still going to have the dynamics going. And especially when we start to mess around with the attack and release, which we should now get into in the next part of this video. Difference number 2 between limiter and compressor, and when to use these two different tools, because they are very different. Let's just talk about attack and release. That's like a big, big difference. All right. So attack time on a limiter, instantaneous. It's like limiting with tape. Okay. We like tape compression. We like tape saturation. The reason tape is a little bit more musical on drums and things is because it does add harmonic distortion. Okay. So we do get this transient spike from the magnetic tape rearranging the oxide on the tape, and it gives us this kind of distortion that makes the transient kind of come alive a little bit more. That doesn't necessarily happen on limiters. So I like to use a limiter on drums or anything transient heavy because it's an instant attack. I like to use it as a parallel. Okay. You really don't want to be smacking your drums with a limiter. I would rather use a soft clip or a hard clip even on the drums. All right. So something like gold clip would be great, or orange clip. Let's look at though the difference between these two tools, because when we go to drums, for example, let's just turn on the L4 real quick and let's hit this with some limiting. Now let's bounce that in place so we can really look at it, because I want you to not only hear it, but I want you to visualize this, okay? So let's bounce this in place and we're gonna say drums limited. Now, if we look at this, we can check out the transients. And the transients are pretty much dead, right? They're not necessarily dead. They're just kind of flattened out, right? So they are just like brick walled. We don't have that punch, all right? We can control the release on a limiter usually, right? So we can make it kind of pump a different way, like on the release, but we are pretty much killing the transient, which is something I wouldn't really want to do on drums, but I may want to do on a bass, right? A really clicky, ticky bass. I might want to take care of that clicky, ticky string attack shit and just make this really woolly, soft, fuzzy bass. Throw a limiter on it. It's instant on the attack. And then you just adjust the release to the notes and make it breathe, right? Now let's hit the drums with a compressor and understand, I think you'll understand right away why it's so different and why a compressor is the right tool for the job when you're inserting on drums, okay? First of all, we can set the ratio to something like 3-to-1 or so, right? That's a nice thing because we're not completely smashing the drums. We're not completely brick walling the drums. So we have a nice gentle thing happening. Second of all, we can compress really pretty hard and adjust the attack, because if we go instant on the attack, you'll see the threshold go down really fast and a lot. But as we back off the attack, we slow it down, we're not compressing as hard, even though the threshold's down, because the compressor is taking longer to attack. And because we have a transient instrument like a kick drum and a snare drum and hi-hats and all these things on a drum kit, it's going to not react to the other stuff because it's missing the peaks. So we really want to adjust our compressor so that it's just coming after the peak, right? So we can bring up the low-level information of the sustain of the drum, and we can build this sort of rhythmic pulse to the drums and make them punchier even, right? So if we take the attack down to where we start to see some good compression, 3 to 6 dB. Okay, so we're at about 100 milliseconds here on the attack. Then we can start to mess around with the release. Now adjust the threshold, and then we'll make up the gain for how much we're compressing. Way cooler than a limiter, because we are still bringing up the low-level information because we're compressing and we're bringing up makeup gain, but we're not killing the transient, we're letting the punch through, and then we're also kind of bringing up the tail and the sustain, which the room mics and everything else in the drums can breathe more and it can sound more bombastic, right? Especially if there's other mics like a crunch mic, a distorted mic, etc. You're gonna get more vibe and more glue and more just vibe and aggression even. You can get more aggression out of a compressor, right? So now let's bounce through this. And I'd say the release is a little bit slow, but the slower the release, the heavier the drums are going to sound because they're going to be letting go a lot slower. So you're going to be bringing up that low level information on the sustain longer. Okay. So I'm going to take the release down. And if we take the release faster, you're going to get more of an open sound because it's kind of grabbing and letting go. Okay. So you really want to find the pulse that you're looking for with your drums or your transient information. So I'm going to take this down to like 120, somewhere around here. And now let's bounce this in place. And what we can see here and here, because we're gonna bounce between these two, the difference between limiting on drums and transient information and compressing. First of all, look at what the limiter did. It took the peaks down and said, you're brick walled, bro. You cannot go any further. The compressor said, yeah, it's fine. You can go a little further. I'm fine with that, right? As long as it's dynamic, we're gonna keep your dynamics, right? So it's fine. And you could see that the compression has more of a nice attack to it. See how it's like dynamic here with the triangles? And then you go to this limiter and you could see the clipping. It's not clipping, it's turning down of those peaks right there, right? So we're not getting as punchy. And you can literally just see it right there. Okay, so now let's play it back to back so you can understand the difference between the punch on the compressed version versus the limited version. It's a very different sound and they have very different uses, and it's something that you need to understand about the differences between a compressor and a limiter, the attack time, okay? The attack and release. This is how we get pulse and understanding the brick wall versus the ratio and the ability to negotiate the gain versus brick wall it, okay? Now let's move on to the next part of this video and let's keep diving deeper into this topic so you can understand where you should be using a limiter and where you should be skipping out and using a compressor. Real quick before we get into some real life scenarios on where to use limiters versus compressors, I'd like to mention our sponsors, which is me. I sponsored this video. Yes, I pay for the editor. Yes, I pay for the studio, the cameras, everything else. And if I'm lucky, YouTube AdSense will get me back about $20 to $50. Okay. So all I'm asking of you guys is if you get anything from these videos, share the show, drop some love in the comments, hit the like button, engage however you can to help push this video out. Okay, now let's get into the real world scenarios. I want you guys to get a lot out of this video, okay? So if you have any questions as well, just drop them in the comments. This is the ultimate reason why and where to use a limiter versus a compressor. All right, let's talk about vocals. First thing I would think about when using a compressor on vocals, or why I would use a compressor, is to even out the performance. Okay, so if I'm you know, I got these low notes and you can't really understand what I'm saying there, but then it gets really loud. You know, we probably want to use a compressor there. We don't want to use a limiter. We still want the dynamics, the punch, especially like if you're a rapper, right? You want like a little bit slower of attack. A lot of rappers, they over attack their vocals and then it just sounds really shitty. Like, let's be real. You know, all the dynamics are lost in the punchiness of the vocal. So you got to find the right attack and the right release with a compressor. But here, let's check this out. As an example, here is a little phrase here, and you can see this is kind of like lower, this is a little higher, etc. So we're going to start to even this out. And with this, we can do like 2 to 1 or like 3 to 1, you know, somewhere around here on the ratio. And then we're just going to compress where it goes like maybe 3 dB, you know, or so on some overs, on some peaks here, like these kind of things. And then we want to bring up the gain so we can bring up this low level information. And this will just kind of even out the performance. And we want to make sure that the attack is letting through the initial kind of punch of the vocal and the vocal phrasing. And we want the release to be, you know, fast enough, but we really want to kind of match the rhythm of the vocal. So let's hear this on vocals and set this compressor.
Where'd you learn to be deceiving with the way you need me? Got me on your woven road. Where'd you learn to be deceiving with the way you need me? Got me on your woven road. Where'd you learn to be deceiving with the way you need me? Got me on your woven.
All right, you hear how the performance is now a little bit more even. Even when I go, you know, those parts get turned down a little bit, right? So now if we just A-B this, or we can make a bounce real quick. Let's do what we've been doing, right? Let's bounce in region in place and we'll call this compressed. And you can see the performance has evened out a little bit more. And that's very much why you would use a compressor. And on here, I have 1.9 on the gain where I'm gaining up 1.9. I might not want to do that much. You can see that the gain makeup, it made it louder, right? So louder is always going to sound pretty much better. So don't trick yourself. But you can also see that the lower parts came up a little bit, like see, compared A, B. And then the higher parts came down to meet kind of the lower parts a little bit better, right? So to even out the performance, that's why I would use a compressor. Now, why would you use a limiter on a vocal? That'd be crazy, right? Well, not really. Sometimes you want to limit at a certain level, right? You want to, like, I don't want the vocal to ever go past this thing, right? This amount of gain. So if I go to the L4, I can say, I don't ever want the vocal to go past -1 dB. I want that headroom always to be there for the master bus, right? I never want this to go any further than that. So let's start to only catch the really loud parts. That's what a limiter can work really well for. Like you're belting, someone yells or someone's like screaming and then someone's talking really soft and they're singing really soft and then they're screaming. You want to catch like a peaky part. And you can see in this performance, this part, I kind of like have a yeah, this kind of shit going on. So let's try this. Let's try to only set the limiter so it catches only when it crosses this threshold ceiling, right? So let's go like up here or something. I don't know. Let's check it out.
Purpose, can't you let me go? Yeah, when you
You see how that happened? It just kind of barely just like tickled it. And a limiter is awesome at this because it's instant. So if something is like, really punchy with the vocal, sibilance, plosive, whatever, it'll catch it and it'll turn it down. So it's a great tool for that. Something's getting belted and you just want to take that down and not have it pass a certain threshold ceiling. Okay, so you got that ceiling there that you're setting. Okay, now let's move on. Let's talk about other instruments. For drums, where do we use a compressor? I already showed you. Make a drum punchy, give it breath, give it life, right? But why would we ever use a limiter on drums? Well, if you're working with live drums, sometimes you might have a drummer that's not super consistent. So you have snare drums shots that are like a little over and some are like under, you know what I mean? You got like this and the drummer's just not very consistent and you want that performance just to be more consistent and you want to catch those kind of snare drums that go crazy and they peak out. Great, just use a limiter. And also, you're gonna set a ceiling on your drums so that you could turn down any peaks so that those peaks don't hit your next stage of gain, your next drum mix bus that then goes to the master bus, right? And you're not hitting all these peaks all the way up so that you have to make this master bus processing work really hard, right? So that's why we could use a limiter. So let's try this on drums.
yeah, when you learn to be deceiving with the way you need me, purpose, can't you let me go?
Right? That's nice. It still brings up kind of a little bit of gain in the low level, but it's not taking your transients and killing them. It's just turning down anything that's going a little bit too peaky, okay? And we're at -0.14 on the ceiling. So anything like the snare drum is like way louder and way more dynamic than maybe the kick drum or the hi-hats or whatever, and you want everything to kind of like level out a little bit more, you can use a limiter. If you want to make something pump and be punchy and change the transient effect of the drums, then you probably want to use a compressor on drums, okay? So two different things there. Now, if we're going into bass, let's talk about bass because bass is going to be way different as well. So it really depends on what you're looking for out of your bass, but this is like a Juno synth bass. Let's hear this. Now, what if we just want this bass to just be, let's get rid of any of the attack or anything. We probably want to use a limiter. We can just limit the shit out of it. So we can bring it up so it's just sausage like a it's just bass on and off. So let's take the ceiling way down. Let's take the threshold way down. Awesome, right? And it also got rid of the initial attack clickiness in the Juno. So now it's a little bit smoother on the bass. So we got this fat bass that we've now limited with a ceiling, and the threshold is just attenuating down anytime it crosses the threshold. So we're instantly attacking it, which is really awesome. And we can even, with the L4, which is really fun, you have like an aggressive mode, which will add some harmonics to it. Check it out. Pretty cool, right? So that's why we would use a limiter on bass. A compressor on bass, you might want to use it just to even out the plane. Again, sometimes you'll have notes in a bass, and this is a bad example, like with an electric bass, right? You might have notes that go like boo, and then other notes that go boo, right? Boo, 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 boo. We call it like one note bass, right? And a compressor, you can make that so all these notes are much more even. With a limiter, you can just really do that. Super simple, right? And again, when you watch this being bounced out, you can see the difference. You can see what happens. This is just going to be weird because it's a synth bass, but let's just bounce this through the limiter, and then I'll show you what the compressor looks like with some adjustment to the attack. So let's take the limiter and let's turn it on, and let's limit the shit out of it, and let's bounce this in place. And now let's take the compressor on the bass and let's try to make it a little bit more punchy on the attack. And we'll go pretty high on the ratio. We'll go like 4-to-1. Right? And then we're going to compress really hard, and we're going to let the attack kind of come through initially. And then we're going to, let's keep the release really long. And then we'll go to an opto setting here. All right, that's about right. Now let's bounce this. It's not perfect, but I'm not perfect. Nobody's perfect, right? Compressed. And watch what happens to the difference in the waveform. You can see right away that we actually shaped the attack of the bass, the compressed version. So this has more attack, and it has this kind of like the attack comes through and then it gets compressed and evened out. And you can see it's still not as crazy as the limiter. So even A-Bing this, here's the compressed version. Right? We get a different sounding bass. And this is a synth bass, so it's really hard to show this on a synth bass. But with an electric bass, an acoustic bass, or anything that's going to be plucked or finger picked, it's going to be super dynamic with a compressor, or it can be completely just flattened with a limiter. All right. So these are the different ways that you would use a compressor versus a limiter. Hopefully this has been really helpful for you guys. And let me know if you have any questions. Hey, what about if I use it on a reverb return, right? Hit me in the comments. The final frontier, limiter versus compressor. The master bus. We got to talk about the master bus. Why would we use a compressor on the master bus? Why instead of a limiter? And why would we use a limiter? And why would we use both or neither? All right, let's talk about it. So first off, compressor on the master bus. SSL compressor is like the classic, right? The VCA style compressor, because it's fast, it's punchy, it's tight. And the biggest reason to use a compressor on the master bus is it cohesion. We like to say glue. That's a big, term in mixing and mastering. It glues things together, bro. But really what it does is it keeps everything cohesive, right? It makes it so that the drums and the vocals and the bass and everything sit together and lock in together. And they don't sound like they're doing different things or they're in different worlds. And that's a big part of that is the fact that you're hitting the master bus with this really dynamic and complex waveform. But when we throw a compressor on it, we're giving that complex waveform the same attack and release altogether. Okay, so we can make it breathe and pump in a certain fashion. And usually you want to do it to the BPM, right? But in this sense, I think 30 milliseconds on attack is such a nice thing on the SSL. And the auto release, or even down to like 0.1, 0.3, these are really great places to be on this. It's just going to give you cohesion and punch. And then the makeup gain, of course, is going to bring low-level information up. So I like to just barely tickle this compressor on the master bus for some glue. And this is what it sounds like.
I get nervous when I'm with you, baby, begging. What's the purpose? Can't you let me go?
Now, why use a limiter instead of a compressor or with a compressor? The compressor can add this glue and it can still be dynamic and it can help the record pump a little bit better, right, to the pulse. But a limiter, as you can see, we had overs going on the master bus, and that's a big reason why you can't just use compression on a master bus. Unless you want a really, really quiet record and you don't want to compete in 2025, 2026, 2027, you don't want to even be in the record business because you got to be loud. I'm sorry. It's just like the loudness wars never stopped. They never died. People just got really, really good at making things super loud and still dynamic sounding, right? The perception of loudness and harmonics and distortion and transience and life still happening in a loud record. It's competition because louder is better to our ear, no matter what anyone says. It's physiological to the human being. Okay, so you have to understand that. So if we want to get loud, we have to use a limiter. So the L4 has a ton of really cool features on it that can make things sound even more loud and go really aggressive with this idea of loudness and low-level information. But the limiter itself on the master bus gives us, again, a ceiling. So we can push up everything like crazy, and then we can put a limit to it. We can just turn down the peaks, right? Right at 0. I mean, we can leave it at 0. It'd be fine, right? We're not going over 0 if we have the ceiling at 0. But I like to give myself a little room for codecs, for, wave to MP3, wave to, 192 kilobytes per second that it streams on, streaming sites and stuff and YouTube, and the compression that happens on TikTok. So I give myself a little bit of room. So I might want to give myself, negative 0.03 on a ceiling. But this is just going to literally turn down anything that crosses that or starts to cross that ceiling. So we can take this threshold and we can really limit. We can bring up low-level information and make really loud that music, the song together, right? And we can adjust just the release. But on this limiter, I'll show you some other things. But let's start to bring the threshold down and hear what happens. Everyone's gonna love it because it's louder.
I get nervous when I'm with you, baby, begging, what's the purpose? Can't you let me go? On your woven rope.
Right, so let's A-B this so you can understand. Even just let's kill the compressor. We don't need the compressor now. We're gonna just use a limiter.
I get nervous when I'm with you, baby, begging, what's the purpose? Can't you let me go? Yeah.
I mean, nobody's gonna say, oh, I really like it quieter better. Right? No average listener, no one listening on the radio, no one listening on Spotify is ever going to go, man, the quieter one, man, I really prefer that one. Maybe some of us audio engineers, we're going to be like, yeah, we like the dynamics and I like how like things, kind of sound more dynamic and things are quieter and, you can hear the background differently. But dude, that's not, we're humans, right? So physiologically, we like louder, and that's why I use a limiter on the master bus. And also, it just sounds good. Like, an L4, especially like this limiter is insanely good sounding, just sounds musical. And you can switch through a couple of the things, right? I like aggressive on this, but you can do smooth, you can do modern, safe for L2. And also it'll show you your LUFs in short term. It'll show you your release time. You can do clipping, right? So you got 1 time here, but you can go up to 10 times on clipping. So this is a really great way to give yourself a little bit more grit and more vibe, because now you're adding clipping to limiting. And clipping is going to allow you to limit even harder because you're going to clip the peaks before it hits the limiter, right? So now you can turn it up even more and get that low-level information up even higher. But this is why I'm showing you all this, is because limiter versus compressor, you got to understand all the different gain stages throughout your mix on where you should be using these different tools and how you can pre-chew all this information before it hits your master bus, before you're just throwing a limiter on the master bus and turning it way down on the threshold. You get what I'm saying? We want a dynamic record. We want it to sound loud, but we still want our punch. So we're going to use compressors throughout the process. We want that forward loud kind of thing happening, but we want to catch any overs. So we use limiters throughout our process, not just on the master bus. All right. And then on here, we can use clipping. We can stereo link. We can unstereo link so it's wider sounding, right? So now we have a left and right difference. So check this out.
I get nervous when I'm with you, baby, begging, what's the purpose? Can't you let me go?
All right, so there's not too much to this song, so it's hard to like really show it off right here, but you can hear all the differences in the harmonics when we bring that clip up and when we go to the aggressive mode. And this is a really cool thing. This is the last thing I'm gonna show you on the L4 and the idea of this, because this is much more than a limiter, but this video hopefully has been really helpful for you to understand compressors versus limiters. We have an upwards limiting, which is insanely cool. So this is going to give us the low level information. We're going to bring it up. We're going to expand it.
I get nervous when I'm with you, baby, begging, what's the purpose? Can't you let me go? Yeah, where'd you learn to be deceiving with the way you need me? Got me on your woven rope. I get nervous when I'm with you, baby, begging, what's the purpose? Can't you let me go?
And there you go. I'll leave links in the description to these plugins I've been using. The L4 Ultra Maximizer, the SSL, the RComp, all that stuff. These are all Waves plugins, and I'm doing it all with Waves plugins because you could just get a bundle, you could do the monthly thing, and you'd have all of these. If you want to mess around with them, you can use whatever you want though. You know, this is just compression versus limiting, where and why to use them, when to use them, what they do differently. They're different beasts. They are completely different processes, so don't have anyone ever telling you, oh, it's the same thing, compression, limiting, whatever, right? Now you understand a little bit more about it, hopefully, and if you do, like the video. All right, drop some love in the comments. I appreciate you guys tuning in, and I'll see you next time. I'll try to bring more game to you guys as much as possible. Let me know what you want to learn next. All right, see ya.